Good morning, friends. Today I'm going to discuss about monopoly. In the previous lecture, we have seen that what is actually perfect competition to do with the market environment or competitive conditions, etc. So today I'm actually going to deal with the monopoly, where you have only one seller. See, the first condition of monopoly is actually large number of buyer, but that is the buyer number of buyers is not being restricted, but the seller is only one seller. So because of the seller is one, you call it as monopoly. So monopoly means single seller. So second condition of the particular market setup is what is called the product without close substitute. Now it is quite clear that and evident that logically that once you have only one seller, the seller is going to have a complete sort of discriminatory power or the market power basically to determine the price commodity, and therefore whatever commodity which is he or she is going to sell you has not going to have any sort of a close substitute at all, because that is the product with the close substitute. And then perfect knowledge, again, perfect knowledge of whom is the most important question rather than this thing. There is imperfect knowledge. In the monopoly it is not actually there is an error. Under the monopoly you have imperfect knowledge. That is, you don't being as buyer, you don't know anything about the commodity, because the commodity completely the complete knowledge of the commodity is actually being with the seller, because seller produces and sells, you just buy the things. And now if it is a complete monopoly and if he or she is not actually releasing any information, that information is actually makes the commodity not to be sold in the market, or whatever information the monopoly releases is going to known to all other things. So there is there are two different things. Only sometimes you can see that actually only specific information is being revealed to specific people, and that makes actually them buy the commodity. But sometimes that information is actually public to all, so everyone can go and buy the commodity. That will increase the price. So it can create different effects, because the whole commodity is going to be controlled by the seller. Excuse me. So the other point is actually being he or she is a monopoly, then there is no point of other person entering, because they cannot enter. So barriers to entry is another assumption. No government intervention, that means there is no third party to determine this kind of an market situation. So key implication is the following, like downward sloping firms demand curve. Now we need to be very careful to understand this downward sloping firms demand curve. Now firms demand curve is actually downward, because firms demand curve is also the AR curve of the firm. That is the very interesting aspect of this particular thing. So firm has market power and determines market price, can change P is greater than MR, which is equal to MC. So now if your price is greater than P, if your price is greater than MR, marginal revenue, marginal revenue is going to be equal to marginal cost. So that is a kind of trickiness. Your MR and MC is not going to be necessarily equal under this particular situation. Why? Because your marginal cost is not at all determines the marginal revenue in this case. That is a kind of an idealistic situation. You can say that the MC and MR is going to marginal revenue and marginal cost is going to be different, because once you have that itself is going to give you a kind of an understanding that your MC and MR equals if and only if you works under the constant return. But before the constant return there is a decreasing return, as well as there is a possibility of an increasing return. But no firms under the particular market condition is going to produce beyond this particular characteristic, that is marginal cost is going to be marginal revenue. So but at the same time, if your price is greater than that, then this is actually going to have some problem, but I'll come to that later. In short run, monopoly earns profit or loss or shutdowns. In the long run, profit is greater than normal, is sustainable. And in the short run, again in the textbooks you can see all this statement, like in the short run, monopoly earns profit or loss or shutdown. Now that is only possible if the price is less than MR or MC. Now if that is the case, nobody is going to enter in the because the short run again is problematic once for the monopoly as far as a theoretical setup is concerned. Of course, maybe empirically you can say that actually because of the firm exited from the market, then there is no seller in the market. So you cannot simply say that there is a monopoly. So all this is actually comes with the fact that there are multiple sellers in the market. So no, under monopoly means you are dealing with only one seller. That seller exit from the market, then the market literally never exists. So then another firm comes, then we are talking about only that firm. There are many buyers are ready to buy, but the problem is that there is no much seller, because then the price will go up. Now then if the prices go up, then why should some assumes that the marginal cost has to be equal to marginal revenue. So again, that is actually having some sort of a trouble when you talk about. So in the long run, profit is greater than normal is sustainable indefinitely, but even with profit which is equal to normal is equal to. So monopoly does not operate efficiently in this case. Again, this has been actually aired by economists. I don't understand that what they really mean by this kind of a situation. So this is because of many other reasons. Maybe back of their mind there are different things are operating. Okay. So a source of monopoly power as a theoretical setup, you cannot simply make it it exists in all. So monopoly means a single seller. A single seller exists, then only we can talk about that market situation. So if that single seller cannot exist, then you cannot talk about that market. So that market never exists in that sense. So it is very tricky to basically deal with the market conditions. And you have different sort of a market, like a natural market, natural monopoly, created monopoly, etc. Now, what is a natural monopoly? Natural monopoly is a monopoly because economies of scale and excess capacity you enjoy, economies of scope and cost complementarity, capital requirement, sales and distribution network, differentiated products and brand loyalty, etc. Now, this differentiated product and brand loyalty is nothing to do with the monopoly, because that is only about that particular commodity. So that particular commodity has no competitor as such, this particular concept. So if there is a close substitute exists, then you are not actually talking about monopoly. It is called the duopoly or the non-monopolist competition. No monopoly situation. So created patent and other legal barrier is also gives you a kind of monopoly. Real issue we are going to deal with. This is what is actually kind of makes up a firm monopoly. Patent and other legal barrier, license, trying to exclusive contracts, collusion, tacit or open collusion, entry limit pricing, predatory pricing, etc. Because of all this makes a firm monopoly. Or natural reason that you are only one. See, you can talk about actually there is a land where you are the only person to sell some X commodity. There are many people to buy that. Well, so long as the other person is not there, you are the single seller, so you can sell. Now you can prohibit the other entering into the business. The moment if they enter, then it is no longer actually a monopoly. It's going to be a duopoly or a oligopolistic market situation. So this is the difference. A monopoly means only one seller. So once you are clear with this thing, then all this assumptionary injection inside, or the imaginary injection of all these things will create your model, crumble. So I don't want to actually crumble my model. As far as my model is concerned, only one seller. That seller controls everything. So the price or the quantity, whatever, or both. Of course, the only one seller, then he or she definitely is going to control the whole price of the commodity. Same the case with the whole quantity. Once you control the price, then you also control the quantity. Okay, because in this case the buyer doesn't have actually any sort of a sovereignty, because the buyer has no control over the price of the commodity. Once you have control over the commodity price, then only you basically have the quantity of the commodity. So logically, only one seller means he or she controls either price or quantity or both. Technically speaking, the moment you control price of the commodity, you also control the quantity of the commodity. And vice versa also is true in some case. If you control the quantity of the commodity, then also you control the price of the commodity. Alright. So this is what actually creates really a monopoly. Now there are different situations in which you can actually introduce things, but the moment you introduce things, then you definitely is going to relax the assumptions of the monopoly. So unless and until you relax your monopoly case, you cannot basically you cannot basically have a different result, which I will try to depict in this way. Now, once you have all these things, as I said in the very beginning, the monopoly's AR curve is going to be the demand curve, because the revenue which the firm want to get is going to be, or what you call, that is the AR curve is also going to be the MR curve of the firm also. There cannot be two different marginal revenue curve, because the firm can actually have different pricing. If it is a liberal person, then he can actually fix a price and say that an equal price for. So in that sense, he will get an equal revenue. So the demand for the person is also going to be equal in that sense, as far as the commodity being sold in the market. So those who can buy, they can come and buy the commodity. Those who cannot actually afford the things, then they will never enter into the market. So in that sense, you can create a possibility of a flat curve, but no firm will do, because since they can actually control everything, they will go for actually profitability. So they discriminate price for different buyers. Then in that sense, they can actually give different kinds of setup. So this is going to give you a different understanding that the price discrimination can exist very well in the monopoly situation, which is the stark characteristics of this particular thing. So all kinds of these possibilities can arises only in this particular kind of a market situation, where this is actually depends on the moment and the time which you basically give information to your buyer. See, once you say that okay, price is given, then every buyer will wait for that price and get the commodity. Once some people have a higher affordability, then they will buy at a higher price. The moment you actually differently sell the commodity, that is also depends on the different entitlement, or in that sense different kind of information which you supply. So the information asymmetry plays a very important role as far as this particular market setting is concerned. So you have this particular demand, and you maybe actually either go through this thing, SMC and SAC, all this is actually for me is the determining tool in which you are doing. Actually your marginal revenue is actually determines based on your marginal cost. So you may be producing a higher quantity, but at the same time you already been produce a larger quantity, but you in that sense, your MC equals MR determination allows you basically to determine the price of the commodity. That kind of a restriction is no longer is necessary for monopoly, because monopoly can determine any price, because monopoly is the only seller in the market. He can or she can determine whatever price, and based on the affordability of the people and the information which he or she is actually supplies will create a demand for their commodity. nothing to do with the commodity, but the profitability is actually a function of this thing, but not actually the price of the commodity. So how much profit this person is actually earns is going to be determined by the rules of the MCMR rule, not actually the kind of commodity which is A or B sell in the market. So that is the two differences which you have to keep in mind. So the profitability is what is this brown area or this orange area, whatever color you are seeing. So that is going to be definitely understood in terms of the marginal cost, marginal revenue different or determination, or what you call the marginal condition. So the profitability of this firm is going to be the highest technically, because they can actually have higher control over the price or the quantity of the commodity. Therefore, the difference would be much larger than any other market form. So, the highest profitability under any market condition can be enjoyed by a seller is under monopoly. This is actually quite contrary to what we have seen in the perfect competition setup, where the perfect competition setup you have no profitability, zero, but here the maximum profitability you can understand and you can realize. So as a profit maximizer, a monopoly may try to take advantage of economies. So monopoly tend to try to protect its monopolistic position. Monopoly may take advantage of technology. Monopoly may face changes in demand. Monopoly may try to promote its product, maintain demand, etc. All this is well and good, but that is only a kind of profit determination. See, ATs is greater than MC, P is greater than MR, P is greater than MC, and P is greater than ATs in that sense. So in the long run, you have this kind of a MCMR model, which is very interesting and very essential to understand the profitability. If it is actually for understanding the profitability, then you can say that highest profitability you will achieve only at the time of monopoly, whereas your profitability would definitely zero in the context of perfect competition. But this difference is definitely need to be understood, because the MCMR rule is actually a rule of profitability determination rather than to speak about the price. Of course, price determination. Why? Because MC and MR is not actually the rule of the game to determine price in the monopoly, because monopolists can determine price. It is not necessarily based on any rule called MC and MR, but that can be in the monopoly situation used for understanding the profitability of that firm. Now, if that is the case, then the profitability can also be seen in the perfect competition by the same rule, where we have already concluded the fact that under perfect competition, this is going to be zero in that sense. So, completely you have different setting in that sense. So, the case of natural monopoly, in textbooks you can see that natural monopoly emerges out of competition among firms in an industry with extensive economies of scale. The downward sloping segment of LATC curve extends to or beyond the market capacity. So smaller firms are gradually driven out by the larger firm. The surviving firm would become a natural monopoly. If unchecked, a natural monopoly behaves like a monopoly. It underproduces and overcharges. This is all the characteristics. In fact, a monopoly is always underproduces and overcharges. That itself is actually the kind of symptom of this particular market, and that makes the market monopoly. Otherwise, this natural monopoly, if it is a monopoly, it is going to have or enjoy a highest level of profitability in that sense. But many a time people are trying to mix up the same logic with the government's monopoly, and that is all bad, but the monopoly of a corporation is good. All this is actually completely messed up idea, and I think we need to cull out all this thing. See, once you have a natural monopoly, economies of scale definitely exists, because there is no other person can enter inside. and one firm distribute 4 million kilowatt of whatever current, and the same total output cost is whatever. Natural monopoly, one firm meets the market demand at a lower cost than two or more firms. Public utility commission ensures, so because all this natural monopolies, but this is not actually true as far as the government see. A private firm's interest is actually purely profit, where that profit is not actually the only monetary profit which a natural monopoly government do. For example, the railways had monopoly in India, but the price of the railway is very cheap when you compare with the private bus. Now again, in the transport segment, the driver, that is the government price is actually they control the price because the government intervenes the price of the particular segment. Why? Because they have a sector on the other side operating, which can definitely give an indication that this is actually the benchmark price. So given all this fact, this monopoly of the natural or government driven monopoly is actually charging a highest price, etc., is actually antithetical to the facts. Many examples people try to these days introduce is actually the price of calls. Of course, in the earlier period, the price of this technology is so higher, and therefore the price. What happens to the private player? They bought all the government system, and they corrupted it, and they are not paying it, but all the price being paid by the government system. Why they cannot increase the price? It is not because they cannot. The government is not letting them to do it. In India, you have seen all kinds of this different vicious move from this sort of a segment. I don't call it as a naturally happening one. It is in fact a concerted effort being made to realize this sort of, or make materialize this sort of system. For example, Reliance supplied something without actually having a cost, where the Department of Telecom had incurred all the cost, even for Reliance, but they had in fact a kind of they have to pay a huge sum of money which they never paid. So they supplied this at the expense of the government because of their agreement. But why can't the same, then in that sense somebody can argue that they cannot, the government can't supply, because the government is not letting it happen, simply because of the decision. This is always decided in that sense. So of course there are a lot of questions people can bring out. I'm very glad to basically address these questions as far as this particular market condition and examples normally people try to give. Because why I said all this is because normally in textbooks and classrooms people give wrong examples and wrong justification for their own points in that sense. So let us discuss if anything comes up in another sort of a lecture. So you have different kinds of cases where you can actually look into this thing. So let me go to the degree of monopoly, which I mentioned in the very beginning. That is, so the monopoly has actually all kinds of discriminatory behavior, or their degree of monopoly is actually depends on their control in the price. Because as at the very beginning we said, they are monopoly because they are the only person who is that in the market. So if they can control the price, they can control the quantity, then that will determine the kind of monopoly they are. I said in the beginning that, a few minutes back, that the importance of natural monopoly as well as government-led monopoly and the price. Even the government can actually charge a very high price. They are not going to charge because they have to sell the product, right? So there are different interests as far as the sellers is concerned, not simply because they want to actually have or realize a higher price. Hello, they have to also sell the product. Like later in the sales revenue maximization principle put forth by Baumol, said that people are not only interested, this in the capitalist or the monopolist is not only interested only in the nominal price, they also interested in the quantum or the quantity of commodity which they are able to sell in the market, because that will give them higher and higher level of profitability than simply actually charging a very high price and selling a few quantity. If you want to really be a big corporate, you cannot simply go for the highest profitability rate, but what you have to do is actually you reduce the price as such a way that actually you can increase the quantity. So if you multiply with the quantity, then the amount of profitability which you are going to realize is much greater than what you can otherwise do. So the corporations, the modern corporation vis-a-vis the earlier entrepreneurial, especially the single owner enterprise or the monopoly kind of a situation, is two different capitalist form or kind of profit making forms. So in the corporation mode, the price of the commodity is actually kept reducing. Why? But at the same time, they are increasing their size and economies of scale, and of course their sellability is going to be much higher than a single entrepreneur monopoly, or where their sales are going to be basically constrained in regional or certain spatial dimension, whereas this is not having it. So these are actually the kind of engagement kind of situation one has to keep in mind. So the social cost of monopoly is another kind of situation which arises, that is the deadweight loss and other stuff is going to be, that is monopoly power results a higher price and lower quantity. However, does monopoly power make consumer and producer and aggregator better or worse? So we can compare this with the help of these things. Perfect competitive case, I said already, that is your PC is equal to, so monopoly produces MR is equal to MC, getting their price from the demand curve PM and QM. There is a loss in consumer surplus when going from perfect competition to monopoly. Deadweight loss is also created with the monopoly. So this is what is actually called. But this is only about this particular aspect of profitability. But this much of profitability they are going to achieve, which is going to be compensated as far as this particular understanding is concerned. Okay, so this is pretty straight, and every textbook writes about all this thing. So please go through it, and I think if you have any query, you can come back to me, and I'm very glad to discuss about all this. So the consumer surplus is there, because consumer surplus is those consumer who has higher capacity and they are paying lower price for the commodity. But those who actually lower income, they are on all basically driven out of the market in that sense. So this is also about the case, all right. So in total, monopoly is actually bad for society, because both the consumer and the producer basically lose. But I don't, being a single seller, the rate of profitability is so high for a monopolist. Now, if you are able to make a degree of monopoly with the price discrimination of different degrees, this problem can also be, staged by the monopolist. Okay, so let's discuss about the price discrimination. Segmenting the market into separate classification region, assuming each class of consumer have different demand of monopoly, can charge different prices in each market. A price discrimination, that is, a firm must identify consumer group classes with a different downward sloping demand curve. The firm must be able to prevent consumer of one class from reselling its produced product to the consumer of another class. No inter-market redistribution of the product is allowed in this case. Therefore, firm must have some control over price, and of course in the monopoly, the moment you say that it's monopoly, then they must have. So the firm can identify different submarkets. Submarkets have different price elasticities of demand. The firm can prevent arbitrage and other things. So then they have different types of price discrimination. We call generally there are three type of price discrimination: first degree price discrimination, second degree price discrimination, and third degree price discrimination. First degree price discrimination is a price discrimination at each consumer is charged with the maximum price that they are willing to pay. So in every consumer is having been charged or being charged at a higher price or the maximum affordable price. So under this situation, no consumer whatsoever is going to have a surplus, because whatever price they are paying is maximum price which they can afford. So second degree price discrimination involves self-selection. That is one type of second degree price discrimination is block pricing or quantity discount, in which firm charges different prices depending on volume of usage. This is also very true. And the real world, and the third multi-market, most common market distinguishes by other factors like information. Everywhere it has been played by the information asymmetry. So the fundamental principle of profitability, given the fact that the perfect competition monopoly is the information in fact plays a very crucial role to determine the level of profitability, and of course the price indeed in that sense. So each time the firm sells another unit, it increases revenue by the price of which it sells then its unit. That is why D is equal to MR is equal to AR in this particular context. So this is the most ideal monopoly, where monopoly in this context there is no deadweight laws on whatsoever, because you don't have your MR your MC is nothing to do with this this particular context, therefore whatever everyone being charged at a higher scale. So P is equal to MR, and the demand is MR curve are the same with first degree price discrimination. So without price discrimination things are going to be different. That's your MR is this thing, then you can say that is for the complete profitability. So you can actually say that under monopoly also the price commodity production could be in some way somewhere you can determine that the total cost and total revenue. So the second degree price discrimination is the following, that is price based on volume of usage of good. Those who consume large quantities charge at lower price, and those who consume small quantities are charged at a higher price. So then you have in the real world you can have this example, and the group with the lower elasticity pays the highest price. Example, student and senior citizen may have more limited income, and therefore to be more responsive to change in movie prices, other movie goer may be less responsive to change in movie price. So these are the examples normally stick up with the monopoly market conditions. Now peak load pricing is also been part of this whole story. When demand is not evenly distributed, a firm need to have facilities to accommodate price period of high demand. Even with large facilities, the firm may experience time when the demand is greater than that can be handled. So then the firm may experience costly computer system crashes. So during off-peak time, this is true with all electricity charges and all. There is an excess capacity, the firm charges less at off-peak time. Example, more phone calls are made during business hours. Early in the beginning of the telephone, especially the Reliance GSM, in the night you can call actually costless, but in the morning you have to be paid at a very high price, especially so this is what is called a peak load pricing example. With this, there are many computational things which you can find in textbook, alternate costs, and either you go through any textbook you will see all this computation mechanism. So some question would be asked related to this thing also. So with this, let me conclude the monopoly lecture. So we will see with the comparison of monopoly versus the monopsony market situation in the upcoming lecture.